We're Keka and Manu.
And we're traveling around the world.
Follow us! One of the things we were wondering about before coming to Venice was that €1 per day fee per tourist that you had to pay. Well, we found out, in fact, we're here, we haven't paid anything, and we found out that this fee does exist, but they only use it on days when there's too much of an influx of people, and let's say the area, the city of Venice, can't host anyone else. And just to, you see, it's not even to stop more people from coming because they can't fit anymore, it's a bit to compensate for that crowd pressure and the amount of people there. They charge €1 a day per person. Well, things are going to change quite a bit in 2026. Pay attention to this updated information. From April 3rd until July 26th, there will be a tourist tax here in Venice, which will be, if you book in advance, €5 per person. And if you wait to pay it once you arrive in the city, it will be €10 per person per day. The tax is paid to be able to visit the city between 8:30 and 4 in the afternoon. To be able to book and pay half, €5, you have to do it at least 4 days in advance. In the case of people staying in the city, in an Airbnb or a hotel, since they already pay a tourist tax in the reservation, they will be exempt from this new tourist tax. By the way, we're going to give some important information. It's always been said that having a drink, especially if you're in St. Mark's Square, is like having to pay an arm and a leg. Well, we're close. We're about 5 minutes away from St. Mark's Square. We've had a coffee that we've been wanting to have for hours. A cappuccino and a coffee with milk, $6.50. Well, you're in the center of Venice.
We're in the bookstore, Acqua Alta, the most famous bookstore in Venice. What will you find inside? Well, inside you'll find a gondola where you can sit to take photos, and they also have a bookshelf where you can also climb up to take photos that's made with books from when Venice has flooded. All those books that got wet, they've kept them and made a stand for tourists to take photos. As you can see, all the shelves, the books are high up so that when the water comes in, the books don't get wet. And here we have something more artisanal, which is a bathtub of books.
Held with Lido.
This is the gondola they have set up for taking photos, but it seems that today they have it closed off.
Let's see if we can find a little souvenir to put in the traveling van. We are in the deepest part of the bookstore, which honestly, for being I understand that part of its charm or its appeal is being so old and so... I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost falling to pieces. And right in the corner where we are, there's a very strong smell of bleach mixed with a drain-like smell. That makes you realize where you are. Curious, it had never happened to me in a public place. We are at the Church of San Zaccaria, and we're going in because we find it super curious that it's a church that is constantly flooding. In fact, the interior part of the church is usually underwater. Let's see if it's all year round or just according to the tides. Well, as you may have seen, the church itself is not flooded. What is flooded all year round is the crypt, which is on a lower floor. The entrance to see the crypt is €3.50. Access to the church itself is free. The Church of San Zaccaria already existed even before the famous St. Mark's Basilica. And as a curious fact, and a sad one, in 1106 a horrific fire ended the lives of 100 suffocated nuns. Interestingly, the body of St. Zacharias, which was in the crypt, was the only one that survived. As of today, it can be seen inside the church. As you can see from the amount of people on those steps, we're approaching the famous Bridge of Sighs. The Bridge of Sighs was named because formerly the courts of justice were on one side and the prison on the other. It was said that when prisoners were condemned to go to jail, that was the last time they saw the sunlight. And that sigh, therefore, is not romantic at all. The Bridge of Sighs. In this case, it's once again a sad story of Venice. As you can see, it's one of the few bridges that isn't open. It's completely enclosed. Mainly for that reason, for security. On the right, as you'll see, the palace of, on the left, the courts of justice, on the right, the prison, and you see all its windows with iron bars that, well, are scary because of their thickness. We're in front of the Doge's Palace, one of the most iconic sights in all of Venice. And although we haven't seen them, we've been told that those stairs over there are the ones usually put out when the square floods so that people can walk and access the main buildings. Perhaps from this perspective, you can better see what we said before. On the right, with all the windows full of iron bars, the prison, and on the left, the Doge's Palace of Venice. It wasn't just the Doge's residence, but also the seat of government, the courts, and even the prisons. In fact, as we mentioned a moment ago, prisoners crossed the famous Bridge of Sighs directly from the palace's courtrooms to the cells. We're in St. Mark's Square, the busiest place in Venice. And you see that tower behind that's right next to the Basilica, the bell tower. It's less than a century old, it looks medieval, but its reconstruction was finished in 1912. Why? Because in 1902 it collapsed, it fell completely straight down. Fortunately, no one died. Well, yes, the bell ringer's cat. St. Mark's Square is always the first to flood. When the Acqua Alta arrives, that is the high tide. And it's because this is the lowest part of all of Venice. These two columns, located right between the lagoon and St. Mark's Square, arrived by sea from the east in the 12th century. The winged lion you see on the left side is St. Mark, the patron of Venice. The lion represents strength and power, and the wings represent the divine. The open book usually says Pax tibi Marse, peace to you, Mark, when Venice is at peace. If the book is closed and the lion has a sword, it means Venice is at war. The second column, the man on top of the dragon, that's not just anyone, it's Saint Theodore, the first patron of Venice before Saint Mark. He is standing on a dragon or crocodile, a symbol of evil being defeated. He represents the warrior protector of the city. When Saint Mark gained importance, Saint Theodore was displaced. But not eliminated, Venice never completely breaks with its past. Having said all this, the most important thing of all, Venetians wouldn't dream of passing between the two columns. Do you know why? Because that was where they used to carry out all the executions. Venetians, therefore, avoid passing through the middle because even today, it is a symbol of bad luck. In fact, you can tell who is a real Venetian because they go around the columns and stare at the tourists who pass through the middle, as if to say, you don't know what's coming for you. When in doubt, we're not going to risk it. One of the things that few people know is that there were actually 3 columns. What happened is that the third one fell into the lagoon just before they put it up. It has never been possible to get it out. It's still there, sunk in the lagoon. Well, imagine what this was like many, many, many years ago. The Doge's palace, if they told you that you were condemned, you would leave there, do your route, pass through St. Mark's Square, and stand right in front of the 2 columns. You would look at St. Mark and they would give you one last chance to redeem yourself, to tell the truth. They said you wouldn't be saved, but they said that if you told the truth, your soul would be saved, and that otherwise, if you didn't tell the truth, your soul would burn in hell. Mind you, once dead, into the lagoon. What we are seeing is the Torre dell'Orologio, the clock tower of St. Mark's Square. And it's much more impressive than it looks. It's a 15th century astronomical clock, inaugurated in 1499. It doesn't just tell the time, it marks the phases of the moon, the movement of the sun, the signs of the zodiac, and the passage of time according to medieval astronomy. The Lion of St. Mark appears again because this was the first thing merchants arriving from the sea would see. Clear message? Welcome to Venice, St. Mark, and we are in charge here. At the very top, every hour, 2 bronze figures strike the bell. One is the image of an older person, an old man, the other of a young person. And what they represent is the old time and the new time. There are 1,000 stories I could tell you about the Basilica of St. Mark, but one of the most interesting ones is about the 4 horses we see up there. Those 4 horses were stolen in 1204 from Constantinople and placed up there with a very clear message. We are the ones in charge here, we have defeated the great empire. These anyway are copies, the originals are inside. The curious thing is that later Napoleon arrived and took them to Paris. Once Paris was defeated, once Paris had fallen, they returned once again to the square of St. Mark and to its basilica. Everything in this square was done on a grand scale. This wasn't just the Basilica Square, all of St. Mark's Square was an ostentatious place. It was where punishments were carried out. It was where the festivals were held. Everything took place right here in this square. And that's because everything was designed to make the citizen feel small before the Republic. Another thing that catches your eye is the number of columns that are outside. All of different colors, different materials, mostly marble and granite. And you might wonder why so many columns and so many colors, so much marble, so much granite? And it's because all of them were brought from different parts of the Mediterranean. Everything they looted ended up here. Once again, a display of ostentation so that everyone knew who was in charge here. Even Michelangelo said that this bridge would fall because of its size, because of its width and its weight. It is made entirely of stone. And the thing is, this bridge, the most famous in Venice, the Rialto Bridge, was built several times out of wood. And it always ended up collapsing because it was such a high bridge with a single arch. When they finally decided to make it out of stone, most architects said, no way. Well, there stands the Rialto Bridge for no less than a whopping 400 years. Well, the truth is, we've been quite lucky. Who would have thought seeing this moment on the Rialto Bridge? But we've been very fortunate to be in the middle of the Christmas holidays on a Saturday in Venice and not find as many people as we expected. Even so, we are in the busiest area, it must also be said.
We hope you've learned a bit more about Venice and that this information has been useful to you.
This isn't your typical Venice guide. Nothing with 2 around the world is typical. We're signing off from Venice.
We're still 2 around the world.
Famous gelato, wonderful bridges, carnival masks, history. The reality is that around 25 million people visit Venice annually, leaving the city a whopping 1.8 billion euros every year. And now that night is falling, we're going to tell you some of the darkest stories of Venice. Here are some of the spookiest ones. Venice isn't just canals and romance. Beneath our feet lie thousands of bodies. For centuries, the dead piled up on nearby islands. When space ran out, they simply stacked them up. The most famous one, Poveglia. They sent plague victims there, and many were burned alive. It's said that much of the island's soil is made of human ashes. But the most disturbing part isn't on the islands, it's in the heart of the city. In Venice, there were denunciation boxes. Anyone could accuse you anonymously. Without proof, a note was enough, and if someone powerful chose to believe it, you'd vanish. No trial, no explanations, without a trace. A beautiful city with a past where fear and silence ruled. So now you know, travel, explore, but do it wisely. And if you don't want your adventure to end up as another dark story, check the travel insurance link. Well, earlier I was wondering if Venice smelled. It's clear that during the day, as we said, since it's winter and not hot, the smell was very subtle, but at night with the tides super low, I think it's impossible to get any lower because you can see the bottom of the canals. The smell in some areas is nauseating. It's a very strong sewer smell.